the cloud recording.
There you go.
It may be recording.
There we go. Okay. My apologies.
No problem. Posterity matters. Okay. Tazama's major features. Tazama is a real-time transaction monitoring system that aims to detect fraud fast enough to be able to interrupt transactions that are in flight so that the funds of people who are transacting across a network are protected from losses. If money is changed hands, then the money will be lost unless the money is stopped if fraud is involved. It is API driven so that it can provide fraud detection as a service across an ecosystem to a number of different participants of a financial transacting ecosystem. And it is deliberately a rules-based system so that it can deliver results that are easily understood and explainable to investigators and to regulators and to the participants of the system itself. All our rules and typologies are configurable through external configuration documents so that you can minimize the amount of development work that will be required in order to maintain the system throughout its lifetime. Tazama fits in as a sidecar software service to a transacting system. So the transacting system sends its transactions to Tazama for evaluation to determine if there is any suspicion in those transactions or suspicious behavior, and Tazama will send a response that will indicate either fraud or money laundering behavior in those transactions, and will also be able to route those alerts onwards to a case and investigation management system, which is currently specified and soon to be under development as an open source component of Tazama. Tazama is an open source product, and as such is freely available for anybody to download and deploy on their own. Although we often find that people prefer to work through a system integrator that can assist them with the implementation and also the ongoing maintenance and support of the system. In some environments, a switch desires to operate Tazama on behalf of their entire ecosystem of participants, and they are free to do so as well, where these participants can leverage the API to submit their transactions to the switch's operation for evaluation and then participate in a safe ecosystem for all participants. And then finally, it is also possible to deploy Tazama as a managed service operator where you can do fraud investigations and detection on behalf of your ecosystem as an independent external third party. Tazama is capable of being deployed both on premises and in the cloud. We currently have scripts available for deployment in Azure and AWS, but we are also in the process of exploring DigitalOcean. This brings us to Tazama 2.1.0. We had a fancy name for Tazama 2.0.0, and then I struggled to come up with a fancy name for this one, so I decided to just call it the lockdown release, which is not to give anybody PTSD, because we just came out of a lockdown, which was related to COVID, as you would all remember, but that did certainly make it a lot easier to find an image that had the word lockdown on it. So this is our lockdown release. Primarily called that because we wanted to lock down some of the security features and also some of the operational controls around the system. And the major theme of this current release is introducing some of those features that would make it easier for our users to administer and maintain control over the system and make sure that the system remains secure. So in terms of highlights, we are going to talk a little bit about API security, which is our first feature that we implemented in the current release. We also implemented features for list and condition management. I'll give you a quick overview of those. We implemented a relay service to replace the former relay service that served as a go-between between Tazama and a case management system. And then some of you may have already seen this. We previewed this in an earlier technical steering committee meeting, and it is the Tazama demo user interface that we are also very proud of. That is also part of the current release. And then there are a couple of odds and ends that we'll cover on a final slide just to wrap up our presentation today. API security, we implemented Keycloak as Tazama's identity and access management provider. Keycloak, as some of you may know, is a Cloud Native Computing Foundation incubation project, which is also part of the Linux Foundation at large. We implemented API authentication via JWT tokens. So very, very briefly, and if there are any technical people in the room, please excuse my shorthand paraphrasing of the process. But how it would typically work is you would set up your systems and your users in Keycloak, and Keycloak would then issue JWT tokens for those systems to be able to communicate with the Tazama API. Those systems would then submit their transaction evaluation requests to Tazama along with the JWT token, and that token will then be validated against the Keycloak store to make sure that that particular system is in fact authorized. And it also contains the specific permissions that a system would have to be able to interact with Tazama. The initial set of permissions are actually quite simple. Do you have the authority to submit this particular type of transaction to the endpoint that you are calling? But this also sets us up for the future to be able to extend the functionality for more advanced kind of role-based access, specifically around user-based access for user interfaces to communicate with Tazama to allow a specific user to perform a specific function and not necessarily all the functions in the system. So this is our foray into API security. And hopefully this will also give people comfort that the Tazama API itself is secured against unauthorized access. List and condition management is an operational control that we required in Tazama. A number of our customers have asked for this feature. This functionality allows a customer to set blocking conditions against accounts or against entities to prevent transactions from being completed regardless of the fraud or money laundering outcomes of the system. But with the blocking conditions, you also require additional functionality that allow you to temporarily override certain conditions. So we have two major kinds of blocking conditions. There is what is called an immutable or a non-overridable block condition that you can set on transactions either to or from an account or an entity. And that block cannot be circumvented. So that block will persist on the system until that block is expired, and there is no systematic way for a transaction to then be concluded if such a block is in place. We do also provide a overridable block. So this is a block that is that can be placed on an account or an entity, but can be overridden for operational reasons. So typically what might happen in a particular environment is accounts may be blocked, for example, for deceased estate, and then temporarily you may need to lift that block to be able to perform a transaction from that account or to deposit funds into that account, and then the block itself needs to be reinstated. So an overridable block gives you some operational control over how an account can be conducted and how transactions can be managed. And then that brings us to the overrides themselves. So you can override blocking conditions, and you can also override the system's natural output for interdictions. So if, for example, you have a customer who is trying to perform a legitimate transaction and the transaction monitoring system continuously blocks that customer for whatever reason, and an investigation has determined that the block is not legitimate, then an operational person can perform a temporary override over the transaction or the block so that the transaction will then be allowed and the customer can perform their task. The eGrace relay service is a new component of Tazama. It is a point-to-point relay service that was contributed by Paces Labs in November. It allows a relay service to pick up a communication or a message from a Tazama NATS subject and then relays that message to a destination that is configured for that particular endpoint. The output messages can be sent to other NATS subjects. It can be sent to REST API, and it can also be sent to RabbitMQ based on how the relay service itself is configured. We also intend to extend this functionality in the future to also be able to relay messages to Kafka. In particular, that would be useful for Mojaloop, who uses Kafka as its inter-services communication mechanism. And then finally, a couple of odds and ends. And we're very proud to say that this is the first Tazama release that was entirely managed as a release from within the Tazama team itself. And that was Scott Buskinge, who is our DevOps and release engineer. We have now full ownership of the Tazama release engineering process, and large components of that process have been automated. And we're very thankful to Scott for all the work that he had put into automating our release engineering process. We had prepared the system for multi-currency and cross-border transactions. When we originally implemented the ISO 20022 message format into Tazama, we focused largely on the minimum mandatory messages or data required for an ISO 20022 message. Oddly enough, the minimum mandatory data did not include some of the multi-currency data fields that you would need for cross-border transactions. So we have now updated the TMS API and the ISO 20022 message formats to be able to accommodate the multi-currency. We have also updated some of the internal functioning and the rules to be able to evaluate transactions in multiple currencies and also resolve transactions down to a reference currency for easy evaluation of amounts. Redis, in some time during the course of last year, had converted to a BSL 1.1 license, which created some challenges for us in terms of being able to include it in our system. Tazama is, as you know, Apache 2.0 licensed, so it is not entirely compatible with all of the constraints of a BSL license. Valkey was then a fork by the Linux Foundation of Redis, and we were able to then replace Redis with Valkey through a fairly simple drop-in replacement. The version of Redis that we were still using in Tazama was comparable to the version that Valkey was forked from. So we were able to fairly seamlessly replace Redis with Valkey. And then finally, our engineering team at Cybran had done a lot of work on improving our Docker deployment process. So as some of you may know, we use Docker on a single instance deployment in a particular machine to help people explore and use the system to understand how it works and to also contribute to the system a little bit easier. So I'm just going to quickly show you how that works. So if you have the full stack repository cloned down, inside that repository is now a little batch file. Also a shell script that you can execute for Linux and Mac operating systems that comes up with a little menu. So for example, here, there are a number of options. You have a public deployment of the system out of GitHub, and it will automatically
Justice,
build.
if you can bump the font size up on that because it's pretty microscopic. Thank you.
I can actually. There we go. I wasn't sure I could, but thanks, Kenny. So you can do a public deployment that would build all of your containers out of the code in GitHub. You can do a full service deployment that is built out of pre-compiled containers on Docker Hub. That is also something that Scott had done for us now. So all of our containers are pre-compiled and available on Docker Hub. If you had used our full stack Docker Tazama repository in the past to explore the system, you would have remembered that you would have had to pull down and build all of these containers locally before you were able to compose the system. You are now able to compose the system straight out of these containers on Docker Hub, which makes our deployment process much simpler. And then finally, there's a public deployment, which is only the public components. And again, this is out of Docker Hub itself. So at this point, you would just choose the menu option that you want. So for example, I want a public deployment. And then here you can add all of the components or options to that deployment that you might want. So if you want to deploy the authentication service, you would turn that on. If you want to deploy logging, if you want to deploy the demo, if you want to deploy a relay service, all of these components are switched on one by one through this little menu here that the Cybran team have developed. I'm going to turn some of these off again. And then when you apply the selection, I don't know what's going to happen now because I'm running this on a dinky little laptop. So if I disappear and everything dies, it's the laptop. It's not the deployment process. And I'm also not running Docker at the moment, which might cause a challenge. I'm actually not going to do this. Take my word for it. You can try this out on your own as well. Clone down the repository, run the menu option, and you'll be able to deploy a fully functional version of Tazama on your local machine running inside a Docker environment. And that brings me, I think, to the end of our new features. I just want to quickly give you an update on our roadmap. We did not make quite as much coverage on our Q4 ambitions as we intended, but we did manage to at least kick off most of the activities that we had planned. We will be completing the configuration UI in the next couple of months. We have started an evaluation of AI calibration for the rule processors to assist people in easily calibrating and updating the rule processors for their for improved detection in their environments. And then we also have multi-currency that we have started and implemented, but there is maybe a little bit more work to do. But I think some of that work will be dependent on what a customer or a user would require during an implementation. So mostly the foundation has been laid, but multi-currency itself has a bit of a tail. Looking forward, there are a number of things that we want to add to. We want to improve the event director itself for better routing and more discriminate routing around the contents of a message. Once the AI calibration on rules has been completed, we will also extend that to include AI calibration for typologies. The configuration UI, which starts off to do the configuration of rule and typology and network map configurations, is also intended to be extended with a rule builder component that will allow you to build rules in a low-code environment. We want to explore auto-scaling through CADA to improve the platform's ability to adapt to transaction volumes in production environments. And we also want to add some functionality for batch processing. We do have a batch process in place already, but that batch process can do with some improvements, so we want to explore that. The API security itself, which is now applied to the TMS API, will be extended with user security that is also applied to the administration service APIs, in particular to cover the new functionality for list and condition management. And then there's some work that we need to do around logging to be able to log effectively at scale to help us improve the system performance overall. And we are also starting a journey now on standard reporting, firstly through Jupyter Notebooks, but also as part of case and investigation management, which we are exploring alongside the Camisa implementation, which is due to start soon. I think that is everything that I wanted to cover for today. Oh, one more thing. The demo UI that we had built, let me show you what that looks like quickly, just in case some of you may have forgotten. So this is the demo UI that we had built. We can create users, and you can also explore this demo UI through a Tazama implementation. The demo UI itself was actually completed ahead of schedule and was delivered by AO Group before we were able to complete the functionality for the condition and list management. So at the moment, the demo user interface does not include the list management functionality yet. We are currently working on a requirement specification to be able to update the demo UI with the list management functionality, and that will then also allow you to explore all of the list and the condition management functionality through the demonstration UI as well. All right. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. I'm going to end off with this lovely banner that we had developed. Last year, we went to Tanzania to host or participate in a conference. Rob, you have a question?
Yeah, a couple of questions. Well, firstly, well done. Nice to see the update. First question on Elasticsearch. I see that we've now got that as part of the deployment. Have we now that Elasticsearch has changed their licensing, and have we decided that we're staying with Elasticsearch, or is there still plans to look at alternatives this year?
There are plans. So Elastic, as you see it in its current capacity, is to support the more the development process. not necessarily a production process. But if our deployments are incompatible with Elk's current licensing, then we are forced, obviously, to explore other options.
Yeah,
There are a number of things that we are looking at, but that will come back to the TSC as well as a future discussion.
They're backpedaling on the license is what the news on the ground is, so hopefully won't be as big a problem. Hopefully that'll be a change that a number of companies will do, but we'll see. The other one was this pack. Is it possible to have a copy? Was it in the repo at all?
It will be. Kenny, we will distribute this somehow.
Yeah,
I don't know what.
I'll send it out to the TSC list, Rob.
Okay, perfect. I'll send it
Thank
to
you
you,
so much.
Kenny. If there's nothing else, thank you very much, Kenny. Back to you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
There we go. Okay, thank you so much. Next up would be Sandy. You want to talk a little bit about the your thoughts around the work group for the contribution guide?
Are you able to give me access to share?
Oh, yeah. Again, I'm greedy with the screen.
Are you
Okay.
able to see my screen, the Miro board?
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, Kenny, you mentioned today that you've created a distribution list for the working group based on the volunteers and the participants that we've managed to gather who would like to be part of the working group. So now that we have that distribution list, I can give everyone access to a Miro board that I've created for the purposes of generating ideas and coming up with improvements to the existing guide. What is on here is a breakdown of the topics of what we currently have in our existing contribution guide, as well as a link to the existing contribution guide. So I think as homework for our first session, which Kenny, I'm hoping you're going to set up for us, homework would be to look at the current contribution guide. And then there's a really great example of the Mojo Loop new contributor checklist, which is a much shorter version of what we currently have in Tazama. So the first session we would like to have will be to talk about what are the top 5 things we should focus on in terms of guidelines, processes, or tips that should be included in a contribution guide that would be useful for anyone new coming on board. And we are really hoping that the recent contributors, being Paces Labs and AO Group, will be able to give us fresh insights into what could have been useful to know up front and what could be useful for new contributors coming on board. So that's the planned process, is to set up working group sessions, the first session to look at where to focus, and then to take each of those areas and start fleshing out more content in our guide. Any questions?
So as far as setting up a time for that,
Can
I guess
we poll
probably,
everyone?
yeah, we can put out a doodle poll to the list and get feedback on that.
That would be great. All right, so expect emails with a request for a poll on possible times and then meeting invite for the first session. And as an action, I'll be giving all the participants access to this board.
Great. Okay, anything else?
Nothing else from my side.
Justice, is that a clap or a hand up?
That is a clap.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you for folks that have signed up for that. Getting the contribution guides together really helps move the project forward for folks that are coming on board, especially for something as with so many moving parts as Tazama has. Okay, then moving along. Sir Rob, you wanted to talk about state management.
Yeah, it's more a placeholder at the moment. Just to position that as part of the config service, we need to track the state of the various configurations. As such, we'll be implementing a state management service. There's a couple available. At the moment, I'm just seeing from the wider community what state management tools are available so we can start an assessment process in the next week or so. So it's more a request for everybody to, if they've got a particular view on state management in TypeScript or JavaScript, just to share those if they could. There are a couple of libraries available. That was it.
Okay, you just want that communicated to the TSC list?
Yeah, please. Just if people have a state management tool that they're used to, then we can do the evaluations as part of the process, just to say we're going to be selecting one, and this is the current consideration.
Rob,
Yes.
do you have an outline of the requirement for state management?
Just moving them through the various states. So apart from that, there's not a detailed requirement that we've got from you guys. No, it's just we have a number of states that we need to track.
What are the states?
There were
That sort of,
starting with the draft through to eventual withdrawal of the.
okay, so state on the production end of a configuration, with sort of the management end.
Yeah.
New configuration, pending, reviewed, stuff like that.
Stuff like that, yeah. I can provide a more detailed document when we start looking at platforms. People can say, okay, we can see what you've assessed and why. So as part of that, we'll do that as part of the assessment process. But just really just seeing if people have a desired tool at the moment. I saw Sam's hand go up.
Yeah, a similar question to Justice. Thanks, Rob. I was going to ask a state management of what and the extent of it, because we have different levels, and if we are looking for a framework, it seems like a huge thing. Whereas for a particular entity, for example, if you take a transfer in Modulo, we have states, but that is managed by services and databases. So would like to know more on that. Thank you.
There's a
I
couple of
think the
libraries.
added complexity might be it's almost that you're maintaining transactional state. So if you are making changes to a configuration from one version to the next version, then you also want to be able to track the provenance through the states. So to be able to say these are the changes that were made, you want a snapshot of the previous version before you roll out a new version. Is that part of the requirement?
We don't need to do that as part of the state management, but it will be tracked that it will have come from X, Y, and Z. So there's multiple layers of history available for the various configurations as we go through. There's a couple of
Okay.
It's just making sure that something doesn't become a decommissioned state and then suddenly gets reintroduced without it being a brand new state, new configuration. It's eliminating problems like that. Just to make sure if someone comes and does an audit on the configuration, that you know which configuration you were running and when, and how it went through the various approval processes to get into production. and eventual retirement.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hey, anything else for today? Okay. If not, I would like to thank everybody for their participation in the project. Very excited about all of that. And looking forward to a great 2025. Next TSC meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks, same time. If you have any questions, please reach out. Don't forget, we've got the Slack channel. If you are not making use of that, please do. We have the TSC list and a lot of friendly faces that are willing to help. So that's it.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll let everybody go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever your time zone is.
Thank you very much,
And have-
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.